Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a significant effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And we're going to span the decades musically today, but before we do, we're going to start out with Stanley Karnow, who died recently at the age of 87. Stanley Karnow was perhaps the top American reporter in Vietnam. He covered the war from its beginning, from the first American involvement in 1959 to the last American to leave in Saigon in 1975. And he wrote what many consider to be the definitive history of Vietnam in his book, Vietnam a History, which was made into an acclaimed television series, Vietnam a Television History. It really is a wonderful documentary about the entire Vietnam experience, the errors, and the tragedies that occurred. I'm going to play a couple of brief interviews with Stanley Karnow. We're not going to talk about Vietnam. He was a reporter in France in the 1950s, and he was a reporter in Washington in the 1970s. So we're going to cover a couple of other pertinent topics and current events. The first is his meeting with Ernest Hemingway in Paris in the 50s.
When I was living in Paris during the 1950s, which was a great way, I must say, to squander my youth, I had a job as a reporter for Time magazine. One day I heard that Hemingway had come to Paris. Now, Hemingway had lived in Paris in the 1920s. He was associated with Paris. He's now one of the French icons. So I thought I'd do an interview with him. So I managed to get an appointment with him, and we went over to the Ritz bar, the Ritz Hotel bar, where he usually hung out and drank heavily, I might add. It's now called the Hemingway Bar. So I went over there, and there he was. He came in wearing this turtleneck sweater and looking like there's a famous portrait of him by a photographer called Karsh. And he sat down with me, and he was very gracious and very nice to see this young kid. And he talked about himself. He had just got the Nobel Prize, and he was a bit of a bullshitter. And he said things like, well, I got this little Swedish thing. He said, I gave it to the mayor of Havana. He said, I'll tell you what. He says, you want to win the medals, but you don't want to wear the medals. Then we talked about reporting. He said to me that he had started his career as a reporter for a Toronto newspaper. And he said, what every reporter needs is a built-in shit detector. You have to be able to tell what the truth is. And so forth. He babbled on for a while. And I think he was getting sloshed by drinking too much. I think he slogged over to the telephone and called his wife upstairs, and I heard him say, come on down here and get me out of here. So that was the end of that conversation. Anyway, I've kind of dined out on that my little moment with Hemingway.
Karnow's own BS detector allowed him to detect a lot of the BS that the American government was putting out during the Vietnam War, and consequently he did not make friends with the Nixon administration, which put him on Richard Nixon's enemies list in the 1970s.
Before I won a Pulitzer Prize, the biggest honor I had was to be on President Richard Nixon's enemies list. Nixon was really paranoid. He's particularly paranoid about anybody who criticized him. And so he had one of his assistants put together this enemies list. It's sort of a great big mishmash of anybody that Nixon thought was against him. It was labor leaders and professors and journalists. How I got on the list is a mystery to me. I think it had to do with his not liking my reporting from Vietnam, or simply that I worked for the Washington Post and he didn't like anybody who worked for the Washington Post. One of the peculiar things was that the editor of the Washington Post at that time, Ben Bradley, was not on the list. And I remember him storming around the newsroom of the Washington Post saying, God damn son of a bitch, why didn't they put me on the list? And he thought he missed that great honor. There I am, so I'm on the list. And it's kind of funny sometimes when I go off to give lectures, they introduce me by saying, and he was on Nixon's enemies list, as if it was kind of one of the highlights of my life.
Karnow was criticized for a little liberal slant on the Vietnam War, but he was fairly straightforward about some of the very bad consequences of the American defeat, and one of them was the emergence of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, which we talked about when we did Prince Sihanouk. Here he talks about the Khmer Rouge coming to power after Sihanouk abdicated, something that the American liberals often forget when they talk about Vietnam.
So I used to like to go there, and there were some of his associates in 1970 who decided to overthrow him. He was away in France having his cure, and they ousted him. Now, he should have come back. He could have taken the situation in hand. I happened to be there when this happened. He made a mistake by not coming back. Instead, he rushed off to China and Soviet Union hoping that they would take care of him, which was a mistake. So then what happens to Cambodia is he's gone, and then you have these lunatics called the Khmer Rouge come in and take over. And these are guys, strange, weird guys. This Khmer Rouge were actually, a lot of them were quite intelligent. A lot of them came from upper-class families. But their plan was to turn Cambodia into a kind of rural, pastoral countryside. And they proceeded to kill millions of people, more than 1 million people. And friends of mine, journalists who had gone there, not realizing what they were in for, ended up being killed. One guy who was a neighbor of ours in Hong Kong, well hanged, was killed. So those were the horrible things that happened. Errol Flynn's son was killed. Stupidly, he was driving around on a motorcycle. Fortunately, I survived all those things.
It's good that we remember the genocide that the Khmer Rouge committed in the Vietnam War. Errol Flynn's son Sean's story is a fascinating one. It's told very well in a great book about Vietnam by Michael Hare called Dispatches. But I suggest that anyone who's really interested in the history of the Vietnam War look up Stanley Karnow's reporting in his book. It remains the best introduction we have to the history of the Vietnam War. We're going to move on now to some 1970s music with the death of Leroy Sugarfoot Bonner, who died recently at the age of 69. He was the lead vocalist and guitar player for the Ohio Players. The Ohio Players were a big-time funk band in the mid-70s. They got a lot of their influence from Sly and the Family Stone. They got a record contract from Capitol Records, and they recorded a bunch of stuff, and I'm just going to play a little bit of their best hit, their #1 R&B and #1 pop hit, Love Rollercoaster. And nothing says the 70s better than the Ohio Players' funk music being introduced by Wolfman Jack. Leroy said, "I'm gonna ride."
Oh my, it's so nice to have the Ohio Players back, you know. I promised Wolfwoman I'd have them back. It's her favorite group, you see. It makes her howl, makes her dance and do crazy things with her tail. Everybody, let's welcome the Ohio Players. What did I do? What I said I want to ride.
That's Leroy Sugarfoot Bonner, and in case you weren't around, that's what the 70s were like. But we're going to close tonight with our main feature, and that's the 40s, and that's the end of an era with the death of Patty Andrews, the main singer from the Andrews Sisters. The Andrews Sisters were probably the greatest female vocal group of all time, and they were emblematic of the 1940s. And with the death of Patty Andrews, we have the end of the decade of the 40s as a cultural influence, in my opinion. No one, not Sinatra, not Crosby, no one was bigger than the Andrews Sisters in the 1940s. When you see them, you think of the 1940s. In many respects, they were to the 40s what Presley was to the 50s and the Beatles were to the 60s. Patty Andrews died recently at the age of 94, and she was the blonde, the middle one, and the de facto leader of the group. They were a Greek-Norwegian trio of sisters from Minnesota who early on evidenced great talent in singing and dancing. They were modeled on the Boswell sisters from England, and they moved to New York, and in the late 1930s they started to sing swing music. They sang Benny Goodman songs. We're not going to play their first, most famous song here. We're going to close with it. But they caught the nation's attention with this rendition of the great Goodman song from the Concert in the Sky in the late 1930s. Sing, sing, sing.
Sing, 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 sing. Everybody start to sing. Ooh, wow, ooh. Now you're singing with a swing. Sing, 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 sing. Everybody start to sing. Ooh, wow, ooh. Now you're singing with a swing. When the music goes around, everybody goes to town. But here's something you should know. Oh, baby, oh. Sing, 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 sing.
There were a lot of girl groups singing in the 30s and 40s, but there's a reason you don't remember any of them today, except for the Andrews Sisters. Here they covered another huge song, an iconic song from the early 1940s by Glenn Miller.
Sister, what you call 'em, what you doing tonight? Hope you're in the mood because I'm feeling just right. How's about a corner with a table for two, where the music's mellow and some gay rendezvous? There's no chance romancing with the blue attitude. You've got to do some dancing to get in the mood. Sister, what you call 'em, that's a timely idea. Something swing-a-dilla would be good to my ear.
The Andrews Sisters were big in the early 40s, but they weren't a cultural icon yet. It took World War II to do that. The song that they're probably most known for, the song that put them on the map all over the world, it comes from an obscure war movie called Buck Privates. It's a comedy with Abbott and Costello. The movie's forgettable, except for their performance, their dance and their singing. And I wish you could see Patty Andrews in the middle. I can only play the beginning of the song, but I wish you could see her in the middle, the performance that she does. And this is a song that Bette Midler covered in the 70s and made a big hit again. But here is one of the great songs of the 20th century, the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy from Company B.
He had a boogie style no one else could play. He was a top man at his craft. He was taking complicated months and he was wrong with the draft. He's in the army now, he's going heavily. He's the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B. They made a blow of bugle boys Uncle Sam. If he brought it down, cause he couldn't jam.
You want to catch a copy of Buck Privates just to watch that 5-minute performance by the Andrews Sisters. It's one of the great performances of the 20th century. Here are a couple of other famous war songs they did.
Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, no, no. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Till I come marching home. Don't go walking down Lover's Lane with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, no, no.
Here's a cute war song that was written for them.
3 little sisters, and each one only in her teens. One loved the soldier, one loved the sailor, and one loved the lad from the Marine. Oh, the 3 little sisters, they were the fairest from Iceland to the Philippines. So said the soldier, so said the sailor, and so said the lad from the Marine.
Besides war songs, they did a number of huge 1940s hits that could only be associated with them, including this one. Rum and Coca-Cola, working for the Yankee dollar.
If you ever go down Trinidad, they make you feel so very glad. Calypso, sing and make up rhyme, guarantee you one real good fine time. Drinking rum and Coca-Cola, go down Point Cumana, both mother and daughter, working for the Yankee dollar.
Songs like that made them the biggest singing stars of the 40s, and they also did collaborations with the other biggest singing stars of the 40s, including the biggest male singer of the time, Bing Crosby, Der Bingle.
Just turn me loose, let me straddle my old saddle underneath the western sky. On my cayuse, let me wander over yonder till I see the mountains rise.
I want to ride to the ridge where the west commences. Don't fence me in.
They did a great collaboration with another one of the great talents from the 40s, a nice Jewish boy from Brownsville, David Kaminsky, a.k.a. Danny Kaye.
Take some of me.
So, bongo, 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 he don't wanna leave the Congo, no, 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 no. Bingo, bango, bungo, he's so happy in the jungle, he refused to go.
Don't want no penthouse, bathtub, streetcars, taxis, noise in my ear.
So no matter how they coax him,
I'll stay right here.
Incredible talent. I grew up in the same neighborhood as my dad. I got to play this collaboration with Dan Daly for my producer, Sid.
me out to the ball
Oh, we'll have a lot of fun.
Oh, take me out to the crowd.
When you're loud.
And then buy me some peanuts and cracker jack.
I don't care if we never get back.
Let me root, root, root for the home team. If they don't when it's a shame.
For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes you're out at the old ball game.
Patty's first marriage was to Marty Melcher, who went on to marry Doris Day later on. And in the early 50s, Patty married Walter Weschler, who was their pianist, and that was sort of the end of the group. Music styles had changed, but they were still a huge cultural influence, and I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of that. This is from an episode of Taxi, one of my favorite TV shows from the 80s, so we're talking 40 years after the Andrews Sisters were big. At a costume party, Alex, Judd Hirsch, Lotka, Andy Kaufman, and Tony Danza dress up as the Andrews Sisters.
Hey, it's the Andrews Sisters. Hey, you guys look great. How'd you know it was us? That's a wild guess.
You know, when Elaine told us about these costumes, Alex, he thought it was going to look stupid.
Well, I'm not too big a man to admit that I was right.
Oh, my God. They hit Pearl Harbor again?
I gotta mingle.
Me too. Point me to the starlets.
Shall we, LaVerne?
Okay, Maxine.
Hey, Patty, come on, I'll get you a drink.
And then there's this, a 1966 Sammy Davis television show where the Andrews Sisters, the biggest female group of the 40s, and the Supremes, the biggest female group of the 60s, sing each other's songs. Probably the two biggest female acts of the 20th century.
The Supremes, the Andrews Sisters, right now.
Oh, stop in the name of love before you break my heart. Stop in the name of love before you break my heart. Think it over. Think it over. My dear, just the same, please let me explain. My dear, just the same, you get blessed. I could say Bella, Bella, even say wunderbar. It's language only. Help me tell you how grand you are. Ooh, baby, my baby, I need you. Oh, I need you. But all you do is treat me bad. Break my heart and leave me sad. Tell me what did I do wrong to make you stay away so long. I'll be with you in hours of time. I'll be with you to change your name to mine. Church bells will chime. You will be mine. Well, you know, in apple blossom time. Baby, baby, where did our love go? I feel so I'll love forevermore. I got this perfect girl inside me. Deep inside me. And it's so bad. You came into my heart now. Roll out the barrel. We'll have the barrel of fun. Roll out the barrel. We got the blues on the run. Sing, boom, terror. Sing our song, dear. Now it's time to roll the barrel. Full again. Oh, here.
One for the history books, and trust me, the Andrews Sisters taught Mary, Flo, and Diana a thing or two on that one. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. Our closing tribute to Patty Andrews is their first big hit. It's an iconic song from the 20th century. It's an old Yiddish tune that they made into an American standard. It's one of my family's favorites, by the way, by Mir Bistushane.
By Mir Bistushane, please let me explain. By Mir Bistushane means you're grand. By Mir Bistushane, again I'll explain. It means you're the fairest in the land. I could say Bella, Bella, even say